Welcome to Military Environmental Health Memories. This is episode number 2, coming at you on the 10th of February 2024. It's just gone 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It's a lovely, sunny but cold afternoon here in the northeast in Newcastle upon Tyne. Based on the first interview that we had with Major Retired Ian Armstrong the other day, this is going to be a popular channel, and we're having some fantastic feedback and comments. And on that theme, if you're watching live on the YouTube channel, you can interact with us and you can type any questions or comments, and they'll appear on the screen here, and we can bring them across the screen and we can discuss them as we go through. So today I am particularly happy to introduce a guest to you in a moment, and I'm very fortunate that this individual has agreed to come on, and I genuinely mean this. I am personally very, very chuffed and happy that my next guest, I was just thinking about this yesterday, I met 39 years ago. 39 years ago as young environmental health people, and the particular reasons why I'm so chuffed that this individual has come on is because he's had a fascinating career. I know him extremely well. I served together. We were on our class 3, 2 and 1 course together. And I have closely followed this individual's career throughout my serving army time. And indeed, after I left the army, I've always kept a very close interest in what this person's doing. And he did extremely well. So it gives me absolute pleasure. I mean, a great pleasure to bring into the live stream my old friend, Lieutenant Colonel retired Dougie Ralph. Dougie, good afternoon, and how are you doing today?
Hi, Dick. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for inviting me. It's a great idea. Too many of our sort of colleagues are passing away, and you know, to capture this piece of sort of military history or personal history is an absolutely wonderful idea, and you, my friend, have got angel's wings at times. I'm sure you have.
Oh, I don't know about that, but well, you've got us off to a good start, because that's the ethos, to be honest, Dougie. So the idea was, and I mentioned, you know, before we get stuck in why it came about, and it. You know, John Shave passed away, as you well know, recently. I was unable to go to John's funeral. I knew John, not really, really well, but I was very fond of him, and his time at Keogh. I had a lot of interactions, a lot of dealings with him, and I liked the guy. He was a really nice fella. But I wasn't able to go to his funeral, so that was quite sad in a way. And then a little while later, I happened to be going past Earthlinborough, where we buried Eddie Sawford, you know, back in 2004. And that got me thinking, you know, the people disappear off the face of the earth, literally. And all the stories that we've had. So what particularly came to my mind was Eddie's funeral. And in a way, it was a really good event afterwards. You know, they're horrible events, these funerals, but, you know, in true military fashion, they turn into a bit of a banter and good memories, and all the stories come out. And I set to thinking, and I thought, these are all going to disappear. You know, we go to funerals, and you tell stories, and I'll tell stories, and Jeff McGowan and DZ was at that particular one, and he was telling stories, and everyone was telling stories. And I've got to thinking, these stories are going to disappear, because when we go, who's going to tell the stories then? No one, because they're all gone. Hence this little project. And I was not messing. I was generally over the moon, you know, when you very, very kindly said, yeah, I want to be involved in this. And here we go. So, you know, we've got no real set format. It's just for you to tell your story. And I feel kind of privileged, really, to be the one on the other end of it, because I know a lot of your story, but I know I don't know all of it. And you know, not so long ago, you very kindly invited me around your house, and your good lady wife Chris cooked us both dinner, and we sat down in the back garden. We had a nice bottle of wine and a lovely bite to eat, and you were telling me stories there that I hadn't heard before, and that's why I'm particularly interested in this. But let's go back to what this is all about. You, Dougie Ralph. So let's go back to the beginning. But I want to go back to hear about what you did before you became environmental health. So start from young baby Dougie Ralph, who's just joined the army. Where did you join? What did you do? And then take us through the story, Dougie. Over to you, sir.
Well, I had a military career which started in 1976. I swore allegiance to the Crown in the late part of 76. But at that time, they didn't have any sort of recruit courses starting until the January. So they sent me home from Keo with a wad of money and a new identity, and come back after Christmas. So I thought this was absolutely wonderful. I went through training at Keo, and it was the very old style training. It was very set, probably in the sort of days of the 60s at least. I think, I mean, all the equipment was Second World War stuff, and a lot of the tactics and a lot of the sort of stuff that they were teaching us was very archaic compared to what a fantastic sort of organization the British Army is today. So I started that as a young boy, and I was in the middle of the sort of age group. So I was too old to go into the apprentice college, but too young to be a serving soldier sort of thing. So I had to do what was called a year for the Queen, and I was a young soldier until my 18th birthday. My pension and everything else would not actually sort of start. So I went through training. I really was quite naive. I joined the army because at that time the Navy had got an embargo on for the particular trade that I wanted, which was Commando MA. And so I couldn't get into the Navy, and I had no ambition to do anything else apart from the military. And I've been like that since I was about 5 years old. And so when I couldn't get into the Navy at that particular time, the careers officer had said to me, well, what about the army? And of course, it always astounds me now that people take horrendous time to get into the army. I was in the army in, I think, about 3.5 weeks. From walking in the recruit office to being swearing allegiance and being in, I think was about 3.5 weeks. It was that quick. So I ended up, going through sort of training, and when towards the end of training, you will have an interview with the assistant technical training officer, and they will then look at where they're going to put you. Now, I'd been an absolute waste of space at school. I'd come out of school without anything. And so realistically, putting me anywhere was quite difficult because I didn't have the educational qualification to be able to proceed in a technical way. So I think that the classic sort of the classic pathway was open to me, and I became an MA. Now that is what was before they changed the terminology to become combat medical technician. And throughout my career, there have been those classic sort of fortunate sort of moments, right place, right time, right sort of position. And there have been also some that have stopped me going down a particular pathway, which I otherwise would have proceeded on. And that was, when I was coming out of training, that was one of those pivotal moments. I was due to go off to 23 PFA to become trained as a paratrooper. And unfortunately, in 77, the airborne brigade closed down. And so 23 PFA was shrinking dramatically. and it was becoming what would be 6th Force Field Ambulance, I think.
Right.
And as a consequence, then that was not going to be a pathway that was open to me. So I was then sent off to what they considered at the time to be an alternative an alternative sort of unit, and I went off to Colchester to join the 19 Air Mobile Field Ambulance. And I then spent 2.5 years, 3 years, I think, in Colchester, learning.
This is as an MA at this, as an doing MA. Your MA.
Doing MA things. You know, I was all the way through my career, I was blessed with having some of the most outstanding people, you included, most outstanding people as my colleagues. And in Colchester, one of my best friends that I went through that early period with was Gary Bell, Dinger Bell, who many people know.
Of course.
An ex-4 RSM and later commissioned. So Dinger and I were private soldiers together in Colchester, along with a lot of other individuals who I've remained close friends with ever since. Brilliant. One that many people will never really sort of think of, and that was Freddie Brown, who is the sort of core photographer. People will remember him from his days at Keogh, but Fred was an MA in the army with me in Colchester all those years ago.
Wow, never knew that. Amazing.
So, you know, I had a fantastic bunch of individuals. We were all very young. And of course, in most cases, I was the youngest of all of them. And so I went through that classic sort of education of being a soldier in the RAMC. But it also gave me a time to be able to grow up and to learn no longer to be a boy and to become a man. As you can imagine, at sort of 17, 18, I had an abundance of energy in those days. And the commanding officer, who is sadly passed away now, a guy called Ken Woolhead, he considered that I would be ideal as a PTI. And I was called into the office, and they told me that they were going to send me away to the Army School of Physical Training in Aldershot to train as a physical training instructor. I didn't know what any of that meant at the time. I was that naive. But it sounded good, and it was in Aldershot, and so I was sent away, and I was one of the last to do the 18-week course, which was a significant course in those days.
I can imagine.
And so we went through the whole training, and you know, the end result was that I qualified as a very young and energetic PTI. But I was never really good at it, and I say that, you know, with every confidence. I hated anything to do with the rain, and still do. And so people would, you know, the guys would come into my room in Colchester in Gujarat Barracks, which of course is no longer there, and they would say to me, is there going to be, you know, is there PT this morning? And I'd say, is it raining? And they'd say, no.
There's no, not today.
And I was dreadful. I was clearly unsuitable to go, you know, to progress down a pathway of physical training. So eventually I had to be moved, and you know, time came that I'd done my time in Colchester. I had loads of fantastic experiences. I went to Northern Ireland as a backup support in 1977. And in those days, it was a very, very scary sort of place. Grand Central Hotel in Belfast. And it was a lot different to my experiences later on. I also did something which, when I was in Colchester, which was quite historically mentionable, and that was the 1977 fire strike, where we all had to go away and learn to become firemen very quickly. And you know, without deviating too much, I'll tell you one very funny story.
Yeah, please do.
I had learnt to drive when I was about 14, and I did that in the classic sort of schoolboy manner. I used to tell my dad that I'd wash his car for him on a Sunday morning, and bless him, I would be in the car and I would be driving around the streets at 14 in this blooming car. So I'd learnt to drive at a very early age, and of course, having no fear in those days and no realization of the consequences of your actions, it was not beyond the realms that I would be driving military vehicles before I had a license and everything else. So I did. I was stationed at Bedford, at the TA centre in Bedford, and my best friend was stationed at the TA centre in Luton. And I would say to the sergeant major, because we had the personnel in my fire team were all people that worked in the recruiting offices around the sort of East Midlands. And so I'd asked the sergeant major if I could borrow the Land Rover, and he just assumed that I could, that I had an FMT 600 and all the rest of it. It was a different time, Dick. And I would then swan off to Luton to see my mate. Anyway, in those days, obviously, we didn't know the area that we were in. So when you got a shout, you would have to have somebody who was familiar with the area to be able to tell you to where to take the tender. And that was the police. And we would always have a police escort wherever we went. Yeah. And the police, used to do the shifts on the stag on with us. And I would then travel with the police officer as the medic. I would travel with the police officer in a police car. And I got to know this police officer well. I won't mention his name in case he's still around. But I got to know this police officer well. And I was saying, we used to have a 2.8 Granada sandwich police car. You'd have seen them on the Sweeney and all this sort of thing. And I had said to him, this is a brilliant car. I love these. I really, they're fantastic. So on one occasion, he'd said to me, well, on the way back, Doug, you drive back and I'll sit in the passenger seat. And so I thought that was a fantastic idea. So now, in 1977, as a 18-year-old kid, I'm driving this 2.8 Ford Granada police car with a police officer sitting next to me, and I've not got any license or insurance or anything. So that was So that was the fire strike. Anyway, so brilliant. I moved through to a hospital, and I went to Germany, and I worked in the casualty in BMH Iserlohn. Yeah. And this was really not for me. It just didn't bode well with what I wanted to do. Bags of energy, and this really wasn't for me. I met a friend of mine who I played rugby with, because in those days we used to have a core rugby team in Germany as well as in the UK. And he will be familiar to a lot of people, Chester Pasley. And Chester was a clinical physiologist, as they're called now. And Chester had said to me, this is a new cadre, it's only just been formed, and you would be, get in at the ground level. And so, to cut a long story short, I went for all the interviews, and I was selected, and I ended up being transferred to the Cambridge Military Hospital to start the inaugural clinical physiology course. And it was so new at this stage, they really putting the sort of training scale together as we went. It was a bit down the hoof sort of thing. And so I had to gain an education because, of course, I didn't have any. And so they sent me to Farnborough Technical College to do what was called an international baccalaureate, which means that you do, and in my case, you did 6 subjects all in one, and you had to pass each of those subjects to be able to get the diploma. And so I did that and qualified, got my baccalaureate, and I then was transferred to Woolwich, to the Queen Elizabeth Military Hospital at Woolwich.
Know it well,
And you know, this was telling me that this was not for me, because you know, as Ian mentioned in his lab tech days, the novelty and the fun of being in a nice, warm, dry environment with lots of nurses all over the place soon wore off with the monotony of the actual day-to-day role. You know, I would see 30, 40 patients on a Monday morning clinic, and you were just turning them out like a conveyor belt. And it really, it ground me down. There were some highlights. I won't say that it was all bad. There were definitely some highlights. I was a part of the very newly formed cardiac rehabilitation team, which was physios and remedial gymnasts, taking people that had had a heart attack almost a few days after they'd had them, and actually sort of rehabilitating those individuals back. And I used to do a thing called the thallium scans, where we would sort of run them on a treadmill, and when they were just about to pass out, we would whack thallium-201 isotope in them and then stick them under a gamma camera to see how much potassium had been taken up in that, all that sort of stuff. So there were good highlights, but it was just boring. The routine of it was just boring. And I think the thing that attracted me later on was the freedom of movement that Ian mentioned in his. So I was going to leave the service. I was going to leave the army. My fiance by then was training to be a state registered nurse at Hammersmith Hospital. And I was intending to leave the army, and I was looking at going into a thing in local authority called health education, to be a health education officer. And it seemed an attractive sort of thing that I could use my clinical and service background into that sort of role. But I needed to do something for a couple of years to tie me over for Chris to be able to qualify, for us to get married, and then for me to time expire, because my service commitment would have been up. I think it was something like 6 years. I'd reached my 6-year point, or something of that nature. So I applied for a TTO's interview to be retrained. I indeed went in front of the TTO, who was not particularly enamored with me, and said, look, we met our commitment when we trained you as an MA. That wasn't good enough for you, so we allowed you to change to become a clinical physiologist. That's not now good enough for you, and you want to change again, you know. And I think I was near the end of my service, and so I'd said to him, you know, well, if you don't allow me to change, I will not sign on at my 6-year point, and you will lose me from the army anyway. So he said to me, right, I'll send you over for an interview with the head of the CG, or the deputy head of CG, who was Major Brian Hart. If he will accept you, then we'll see how it goes. I went over, I had an interview with Brian Hart. I think 10 minutes later, he told me I'm in. And I think, you know, because I was perhaps exuding the confidence that he was looking in his technicians, in his sort of future technicians. So
of course,
I then had 6 months I had 6 months to wait until the start of our class 3.
Yeah.
So they sent me back to Woolwich, and they put me in the operating theatre to work as an OTT for 6 months, out the way. And so I did that, and I loved it. I met a load of friends that I'm still friends with now, from the theatre tech. Great bunch of guys. Really, I would say the only cadre within the RAMC that has that similar bond that we have within the Brotherhood of Environmental Health. And that may be because they, again, work in fairly small teams in sort of close groups.
Yeah, close little groups. So that brings us now then to 1984.
That brings us to 84, when you and I met.
So we're in 84. So no, I know what happened in 84 because I was there. I was marching up and down to that classroom every day with you, and that was a fascinating time. And at that time, that was quite interesting for us. So it was evident then, because it was quite obvious on our class view. I believe you did have some rank at that time already. You came on the course with rank already. That kind of did set you apart a little bit, but it was a great cohesive course, I recall. And I do remember, and I don't speak of this very often, but I do recall, actually, I did look up to you. I'm not blowing smoke up your backside, but I did. There was yourself and Billy Meacham who had been around a bit. We knew that. So we were young kids, and that was evident. And so for some of us on the course, the younger lads, that was good. That was a good thing, because it gave a bit of balance to it. You had some people who've been around and done a bit already. So that was in my opinion, a very good dynamic on our course. And I think that's what made our course really good. We had a good bunch of lads on there with all these varied backgrounds and some very different experiences. So it enabled people to play off each other and learn. People like me to learn from other people as well, and give people like you the opportunity to pass on experience. And I know you and Billy and others did that to people on that course. That was really good. So we'll move on then to you now, on our class 3 course. I don't want to steal this show. Let's go class 3, class 2, class 1. Now where's Dougie now? Let's say he's now a class 1 environmental health technician, but where did you go in the meantime? So post class 3, where did you go? Post class 2, where did you go? And
well, as you know, from class 3, I went to London District.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Because obviously my wife to be, because we finished our class 3, I think, in July.
Mid-year.
I was married on the 4th of August. So I literally stayed when everybody else went on end of course leave. I stayed behind to do various sort of odd jobs around the department, because I had my leave after I got married. I went to London District expecting to spend a year of stability before my class 2. But by the 3rd of October, I was 8,500 miles away in the Falklands Island. So as you can imagine, and there were, the thing is, Dick, there were things that happened along the way that were not good management, I think. And the one thing that I will say, I won't talk ill about people, but what I will say is, I remembered those actions of individuals, and I swore to myself quietly that I would not commit the same offences when I was later in positions of authority over other individuals. And so I went to the Falklands, and I did, I think the tour in those days was 5 months, I think I was away, something like that.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Maybe a bit longer.
Yeah.
But you had to get there on a bloody ship, you know, and so that was funny because I was on the SS Uganda, which of course had been the hospital ship during the conflict.
Yeah.
And everything was fine until you hit the South Atlantic. And if anybody has been on the South Atlantic, then it is an experience they are not likely to forget, because it's a bit like an Ealing comedy. The doors fly open and somebody comes in drenched with seawater, and it's all like that. Yeah. The boat is thrown around like something, you know, like a toy. But there are sort of calm days as well. And as a PTI, and I think I was probably the only PTI on the boat at that particular time, because I remember they got me to do the morning PT on the flight deck at the back. Now, this
hopefully it wasn't raining.
The flight deck had just, no, it wasn't raining. The flight deck had just been welded on to the back in a very hasty sort of fashion, as you can imagine. And round the outside of the flight deck were steel posts with a wire, which were collapsed, obviously, when an aircraft was coming in or going out. But when the PT was being done, these posts were up, but there was just a very thin piece of wire that stopped you going over into the drink, and I hated that with a passion, you can imagine. So, but yeah, so I did my tour in the Falklands. It was an experience. In those days, we didn't have the supply routes, so food was awful. We were slaughtering 52 withers every week. This is a poor source of mutton within the slaughterhouse, and the slaughterhouse was incredible. It was, when you look at an EEC slaughterhouse nowadays, they are like operating theatres compared to this. This looked like something out of Chainsaw Massacre. It was absolutely horrendous, but it opened my eyes to a different world as far as environmental health was concerned, because as Ian alluded to in his interview, I think you need to see an awful lot of bad to actually understand where the sort of potential hazards are, and where that sort of transmission of disease can occur, and where in many cases it simply won't. So I did this anyway. So I did the Falklands, came back, and because before you come back, so I just want to ask a quick question there, because I don't know the answer to this, and I want to make sure maybe on other people's lips. What was the team there? How big was the team? What was the structure? Was it busy? Were you out and about all the time? So I'm thinking at that time, 84, things would have been pretty basic, wouldn't it? It'd have been pretty rudimentary. Not that long after the conflict. They were.
So
there were three of us in the team.
Who was the team? Yeah.
There were three of us in the team. The captain was Dick Whittington. And the sergeant major was Frank Shaw, the late Frank Shaw, who was an absolutely fantastic individual. And, you know, he was like my old uncle. He would look after me, and he was an absolutely fantastic guy. And a very experienced communicator. He knew how to communicate with people, and how to sort of, you know, get people to do things and see things your way without being sort of authoritarian and dictatorial sort of thing. And that was a great thing for me as a young guy to learn those sort of skills, those communication skills. So and I mean, I could tell you all sorts of stories about the Falklands, but we'd end up being there all the time. So, but perhaps another
good little team then, and good little team there with. I didn't know that. That's why I wanted to ask. I didn't know Dick Whittington was in. I didn't know Frank was there, and I know them both really, really well. not so much Frank now, obviously, but I knew them both very, very well during my career, and I speak very highly of both of them. So that's very interesting. So now we're back. We come back to the UK.
We had great times. We lived on a coastal, which of course they're saying that the refugee is unfit for the refugees. Well, there were twice as many soldiers living on them as well. But you know, I had experiences again. The first time I'd ever been on a submarine, and they dropped me and Frank onto a submarine because something had gone wrong with the control within their sort of food stocks, and so it just damaged all their food. Mount Pleasant Airport was being built, and so I spent some time over there dealing with a food poison outbreak, and that really opened my eyes to how foodborne illness can be sort of easily transmitted if you make simple mistakes. So it was a great learning curve in that particular way. The best thing about coming out of the Falklands was they flew me home, because I got the last seat. I laugh at that. The last seat on a C-130 out of the islands. This thing had to be. It only took you as far as the Ascension Islands, but it took 28 hours to get to the Ascension Islands, and they refueled it in the air 3 times. And it was full of people. I mean, there must have been, I don't know, 70 to 100 people on this, crammed into the back of this aircraft. So anyway, we got to the Ascensions, and I came home, and I got back to London District. And of course, in those days, you well remember, at the end of your class 2, you would be posted somewhere else. And I felt that it was a bit of an injustice, really, because, you know, I'd been sent away, the only one out of our class, but I'd been sent away for most of the first year of my marriage. And you know, we all know who was the mastermind behind that. And as a consequence, I felt that to stay in London for just another year to give me some stability would be quite useful. Well, they kept me in London because I actually wrote to Manning & Records. They kept me in London, but they post me there as supernumerary. So you're quite right. I was a Lance Corporal on our class 3 because they'd taken away my force crew. I was full corporal in clinical physiology. But I was only an acting full corporal, so they took away my second tape. And retained my substantive rank. But when I went to London, they took that away as well. And so I remember marching into the camp commandant to have, to be bussed, basically. And the camp commandant saying to the sergeant major, but this guy's done nothing wrong, so why the hell is he in front of me? And they could not understand what was going on. And because I was supernumerary, I got bussed down. I don't know how they did it, but I walked out as an acting local Lance Corporal because the camp commandant, who was a late entry major in the Scots Guards, would not allow me to walk out with no rank at all. And I thought that was really, that was another little sort of tick in the box. Unbeknownst to me that I would go back to London later on, but that was another story. So I then was due to be posted after our class 2, and I was indeed posted to the only Lance Corporal position in the cadre.
Oh my God.
Now, by now, there are individuals who are not only corporals, but they are holding acting sergeant as well. Is going to be posted as a Lance Corporal. My boss at the time was a really nice guy, and he said that's criminal. So conversation backwards and forwards, and Dusty Miller had just taken over as the deputy head of CG.
Yeah, yeah.
This was known to him because it was done by his predecessor, who had died fairly quickly, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And as that posting was cancelled, and I was posted to First Armoured Division in Verden as a Falklands.
Excellent. Yeah.
I went out to Germany, and I had a fantastic time. It was a great place. My commander med was the late Robin Short, who was a fantastic individual, and I got on really famously with him. And I had a great team, and you know, as a young corporal in this sort of place, I learned a great deal, and it gave me the opportunity to develop skills and develop sort of my ability again to work in a military sort of environment, because London District, as many of you know, is all suits, and it's a bit sort of
exactly.
It's a bit diverse to the normal military sort of way of doing things. So, and this is Ian didn't mention this yesterday, but of course Dusty decided that his career was outside, and so he left the service, and Ian took over as the deputy head of CG. And one of the things that they used to do in those days was that the deputy head would travel around all of the sort of locations, bit of a swanny, but they would travel around all of the locations and interview the staff and all the rest of it. And indeed, he came out to Germany, and I had an interview with him, and he then, you know, had my whole sort of history. And to go back to London very quickly, previous to that, one of the things that young technicians always get lumbered with is driving round people and this sort of thing. And Ian had come to some meeting in London. I don't know, it may very well have been meeting, you know, for the job at AMD, which in those days was just down the road. But I picked him up from the station, drove him around to wherever he needed and all this sort of thing. And of course, we all went out on the evening, and I drove him back to Millbank, which is where he was staying. And we had a chat in the car, and I told him that I was leaving, that my intention was to sign on and to leave as soon as Chris had qualified. And it was him that talked me out of that. He said, I can see something in you, kiddo, that is going to make it. I don't know what it is, but you have got something, a sparkle in your eye, that I think you have got something for the future. And I really do not think you should be leaving the service. And so I, you know, when I went to Germany, I took that on board. He was good to his word. He came out, as I say, he came out to Germany. He was interviewed. I told him all the bits and pieces. At that time, Eddie Salford was the sergeant, newly promoted. He was the sergeant there, and I was the corporal. There was a sergeant's post that had come available in London District, and I was going to be posted back to London as the sergeant. Now, I said to Major Armstrong, as he was then, I said to Ian, that seems ludicrous. I've only just come from London. You know, Eddie's wife, who was just getting married, Eddie's wife, Cindy, was training at a London hospital to be an SRN. And so Eddie was the prime example, the prime candidate. So Eddie went back to London as the sergeant, and I took his post as the sergeant in Verden.
Brilliant.
Now, being an acting sergeant gave me the opportunity to throw my hat in the ring for the EHI selection. Now, I had no preconceived ideas that I would be selected, but I thought, if I do this, at least I'll get the experience of going through the interview process and everything else. That will set me right for when later on down the line, I'm actually, you know, in contention. So I applied for it, and I got selected to go on the interviews. I came back to Keogh. I think there were millions of guys going through the selection, so much so, I think I was nearly 2.5 hours over my time before I ever got in. I was the last one to go through. Everybody else had been through by. And I thought, you know, this is just an experience. Just go in there, relax, do what you need to do. I went in front of the interview board, and did what I needed to do. Everybody was in the Sart's mess after that, getting blooded, but I needed to get back to Germany. So I went off to the airport, and I never really gave it another thought. Monday morning came. I was sitting in my office in Verden. Chief Clerk came in with a signal and said, "I think you better read that." And I read it, and of course, I've been selected along with 5 other candidates to do the next course. I never, in my wildest dreams, thought that would be the case. And here I am, a newly promoted acting sergeant, and all these guys were sub-sergeants for years. Some of them, you know, had been staff sergeants and all this sort of thing. So, you know, they'd had 13, 14 years careers in environmental health, and I was a new boy. So remember, I'd only qualified as a class 1 less than sort of 18 months ago.
Yeah, exactly.
So, anyway,
that's really cool going. That's good going.
So I was sent back to join the course at Tottenham in the following October. And, you know, I was a bit peeved because I'd just been promoted. I just got in the mess. Here I was in Germany. We were having a really old spamming time. Lots of duty free. I was now being sent back to go to college. So I went back, and in the August of '89, I joined my fellow 5 compatriots as the 6 students at Tottenham. We would be the last students to go through that course, because the following selection would be for the BSc in environmental health, going through college. The other thing, of course, that happened the following month was my son was born, and so it was a bit of a learning curve very quickly. 1, I had to go back to school, and 2, I had to learn to be a dad very quickly as well. So, you know, flash to bang, did the 3 years training there. I was seconded to Woking Borough Council, which was a fantastic place to work. The chief officer had been a military policeman during his national service, so he loved the military. And it was a fantastic place. And I think all of my fellow colleagues that have been to Woking, the likes of Ian Hunter and Gareth Moore and people like this, all loved it. You know, it was a fantastic place, and they looked after you. They looked after the military really, really well. The only thing I would say about my time at Woking that was notable really was they convinced me to do the Mayor's Charity, which is an annual charity thing. And so they got me to abseil down the building. I didn't think it was good enough to be able to abseil it down the building, because everybody did that. So I said, okay, so what we'll do is I will abseil it, and we'll see how many times I could do it in an hour. And so I would have to abseil down the building, go up the stairs, abseil down the building. I did it 11 times in an hour. The last time I came down, I actually descended upside down. So that's how stupid I was in that.
Losing your technique by then. Well, listen, Dougie, what I want us to do, I want us to fast forward, because I've got some specific things that I want us to talk about. So boom, we've come through. You're an EHI, you're qualified, you've done your stuff. You're now a fully fledged environmental health inspector, EHI, at this stage. I want to fast forward a little bit. No doubt you went off and did various things then. I want to get to the point where you got commissioned. So where were you serving when you got commissioned? And then just briefly take us through the next few years from there. So where were you at when they said, right, commissioning, let's go?
Okay, well, I'll take it. I was in London again. I'd gone to London to take over as the Environmental Health Warrant Officer, and that involved, as we all know, that involved an element of ceremonial duties as well, because you're the escorting warrant officer for Commander Med on all public occasions. And so they dress you up like a Christmas tree, and you got a nice, I don't know if people have seen it and that, but I got all the bloody pay stick and sword and all the rest of it and that. And it was fantastic. It was absolutely fantastic. I had 2 Commander Meds that I worked for. The first one, I can't remember his name, which is dreadful, really. But went on to become the Director General Army Medical Services, and had been a specialist forensic pathologist. So he was a sharp cookie, he really was. But I only did one short period of time with him because I went out to Bosnia, and that was a nasty time because it was the late summer of '95, and of course Srebrenica had happened, and so it really was a particularly horrid experience, and it wasn't my first experience of a combat environment. Remember I said that Northern Ireland was pretty bad in '77. Well, I also, when I was at 19, I went to Belize when the insurgency occurred and the Guatemalans came across the border, and I also had been out to Africa as well, and so but it was, I think, my first real example or real experience of man's inhumanity to man, really, and how dreadful people could actually be if they're allowed to get away with things. So anyway, I came back from there, and there are probably lots of stories I could tell you about that, because one of the individuals I was in Bosnia with had followed me back to London, and was now my boss in London, and that was a strange environment, I can assure you. I was very lucky though, because I had developed a very, very tight bond with my Commander Med, who was John Swanston, and John and I are still great friends now. And as a consequence, it allowed me to be seen in a very good way. One quote, I was dealing with some really good stuff as well, because I remember on one occasion, the Honourable Artillery Company every year have a thing called the Flanks Ball, which is a real hoo-ha Henry, piss up on the Friday night. What people perhaps are not aware of is they lease out this very highly prized area to lots of city companies and city businesses and that sort of thing for the preceding sort of 4 days prior to it. And so the people that live in places like the Barbican around that area are subjected to all night long hoo-ha Henrys and noise and everything else. And so they get very upset about it. And they'd gone to the local authority, and the local authority were on the cusp of issuing orders. And so I was asked to go in and negotiate on behalf of the military, and I did that, and successfully, and we got a very amicable sort of solution, and it allowed the balls to continue, but it also allowed the residents to feel that they were being acknowledged and the noise levels to be maintained and everything else. As a consequence, I'd gone in with Commander Med to brief the Deputy Commandant, who was a brigadier in the Grenadier Guards, and I briefed him, and Commander Med had already said to me, at the end, Dougie, I want to talk to him about your commissioning potential. So I want you to, at the right moment, you withdraw out and I'll talk to him, you know, on my own. So I did that. When the colonel came out, he'd said to me, I need to talk to you about Mr. Ralph's, to the brigadier, I need to talk to you about Mr. Ralph's potential commissioning. And he said, bloody hell, he said, I thought he was an officer now. And that was a brigadier in the Grenadier Guard. So if you get a
right, was on the wall from there. Absolutely brilliant.
So I went through the commissioning selection again. You know, fantastic candidates, many of which were commissioned later on in sort of you know, in subsequent sort of boards. But I went in front of the board. It was a seamless sort of interview, if you like. You know, it was, I didn't get asked any sort of tricky questions or anything, apart from one slight one when the DG asked me, because he knew that I was a governor of the school, and he asked me about selective education places and this sort of thing. And actually, he had got it round the wrong way himself, and we all got tied up in that. And after I left, I know that he said, I wish I'd never bloody asked that question. But there you go. He told me that years later, actually. And poetically, I mean, I was, again, flash to bang was very quick. We were selected for commission on the 8th of May, and Andy Charnock and I were commissioned 20 days later on the 28th of May.
Brilliant. Wow.
So it was very quick. But
where did you go?
The 8th of May was a very important moment, because, as you know, everything leaks within the military like a sieve with many holes in it. And so there had been a barbecue that evening at the water point, and the subject of conversation, as you can expect, was who's been commissioned.
Yeah, of course.
And the thing was, the clerk from AMD, because AMD was co-located in those days, the clerk from AMD said, well, I can tell you that because I've got the signal here. And so, as you can imagine, my telephone rang, and I won't tell you who was on the end of the phone, but my telephone rang, and they said, congratulations, Dougie, I understand that, you know, you've been commissioned. And this is how poetic fate can be, because at that very moment, I'm watching the television, and Sharp has now been made a lieutenant colonel, and he has been given his own regiment in the Sharps Waterloo. And so there you go, the ultimate image of a late entry officer, and I've just been told that I'm now going to be commissioned. And so I thought that.
Oh, that's really good, man. So listen, Dougie, so we're gonna roll it forward slightly more. So there's some things that I'm mindful of time. We're on 58 minutes. We're not tied for time, but I want to make sure we get everything in. So I want now to want you to tell me about how and when you heard you're going to become the OC of Environmental Health Wing at Keogh Barracks. Where were you? And then tell us how that job went. See, because for me, that's a really pivotal job in environmental health. You've got people's lives literally in your hand. You very calmly discussed how badly you were treated at the start. So you're now in that position. So you're now sending these people to various places. And I'm guessing that you didn't send newly married men off to the Falklands, all that kind of stuff. But I know you didn't. So where were you? Who said you're now the OC? And then tell me the sort of dynamics of that job, because it's key. It's a pivotal position, isn't it? Important job.
It's a fantastic job. And, you know, I know when I looked through your sort of interview format thing, you asked which was my best job in my career. Without a shadow of a doubt, that was the best job that I ever had. You know, many people think that it was the later ones and that sort of thing. It wasn't. The OC, it's for me, and it's really because of that, what you've just mentioned, the fact that you are really engaged with people's lives. You are engaged with developing the future of the cadre, and you know, you can really shape how that's going to sort of you know, move forward. And indeed, I mean I was deputy head of the CEG at the time. I'd come from Northern Ireland, and I was at Fordiv, and I was just really waiting for that sort of time process to occur for me to take over from Schultz, from Major Phil Wright, as the OC. Phil left the army, as we all know, and emigrated out to New Zealand, and that opened up the spot fairly quickly. And so I was transferred across as the OC. And there were some things that I wanted to really sort of influence or implement if I could. One of them I'd seen for some time, and Phil and I actually worked on this when I was deputy head of CG and he was the OC. That's a good relationship. That's a very close relationship, and I would hope that that remains today. The one thing that we were seeing was that people were being selected for the course on the basis of their academic qualifications alone. And that was really failing us, because a number of individuals had come through who were eminently academically qualified, but they didn't have the personal skills, the confidence or communication or ability to articulate themselves in that particular way that we so desperately need within our cadre. From a very junior position, you've got to be capable of going in the office and talking to a very senior officer and being able to fight your corner. And you've got to be able to do that in an articulated way. Whereas these individuals, not only could they not string 3 words together, but they didn't have any confidence either. And so it was very key to us that we needed to put in a process which looked at the individual and not just what was written on the paper. We were also finding some other things, and that was that, remember, this was the time when a lot of the GCSEs and this sort of stuff were being done, not remotely, but they were being done by coursework and this sort of stuff. And the person that's name was on the certificate may not have actually been the person that was doing a lot of the coursework. And this came out when we got people in who had got GCSEs in maths and English and this sort of thing, and they couldn't put 3 words together on a piece of paper, or they couldn't add up, you know. And it then, you know, when we interviewed people, when I interviewed candidates who were failing the course, and said to them as the deputy head of CG, you know, you've got an O level in maths, and yet, you know, you can't add up 2 numbers. And they said, well, my brother used to do most of my work, you know. And it was things like that, and you'd be surprised. So we had to put a process impulse, and that's when the 2-day selection system, which I think is still in
it still does, absolutely,
now, was really developed. And what we did was we developed a command task process, and we weren't necessarily looking for people that were going to be tomorrow's leaders, although leadership skills, if you can identify them, are very important. What we were looking for was personality. We were looking at how the individual works within a team, how they interact with that team, whether there were any sort of people that hid or people that dominated and this sort of thing. Because, as we've said, we have to work in small teams. We were also looking to see how they looked at tasks, whether they had lateral thinking, whether they could actually work out sort of things on the hoof, as we are required to do in many occasions. And so I would have 2 instructors. I would have an instructor that stayed with the command task and saw each group go round. I would also have an instructor that went round with each group so that they could see how that group did on each task. At the end of that, they would come away, they would get changed back into their suits, and they would go in and they would do a maths test, and they would do a written comprehension test. They would also have to stand in front of the board and give a short talk on a subject that we had given them before, and the subject was what they considered military and environment health to be about. You wouldn't believe some of the sort of things that came out.
I bet, I can imagine,
But really what we were looking for was to see whether they had confidence, whether they could actually stand in front of a group of people that they didn't know and actually be able to deliver something of an actual structure. At the end of that, they would go away for that day. It would be finished. They would have their time in the evening. The instructors would still be with them in the evening. So they would be looking at how they, in downtime, how they are in a social group. The next day, they would come in front of the board. The board consisted of the deputy head of CEG, the OC of training, the senior warrant officer, WO1, and the SMI. And they would then be grilling them. And at the end of that process, when everybody was gone, I would get everybody into the boardroom, all the instructors, everybody from the team, and we would sit down and go through every single individual. And each of those individuals would be looked at, marked and graded and assessed. And I would consider anybody's opinion was just as justified as mine. Because, you know, they had been watching them in various different sort of scenarios and circumstances, and they had seen them. They might have identified something, good or bad, that I wouldn't have been likely to see. At the end of that, we had three structures. We had the top structure, which were those individuals that we would offer the place to on the next course. We would have the bottom structure, which we would say, do not soil our steps ever again in your life.
We're done.
In a most polite way. And we would have the middle grade, which were failing to get into the top at this stage, but they needed to develop maybe one or two areas. And I would write to each individual and articulate this and say, look, sorry, you didn't make the grade this year, but we would like to see you again in future applications. And we would like you to work on these areas whilst you're away. And some of them, in fact, did come back later and get through. And
were successful. Brilliant.
Yes. But what that made us do is that top character, that top cohort, were individuals who were not just academically qualified. They had all demonstrated qualities that were outside of that. Qualities that were, in some cases, difficult to put a finger on. But you just knew that individual was, you know, outstanding. And we were getting an awful lot of TFIs, so an awful lot of transfers in from other sort of regiments, corps and arms, people looking for second careers, people who had had quite prestigious sort of military careers within their first regiment or corps. People like Rob Hinton, who, you know, had had a prestigious career within the parachute regiment and was now looking for a change. I will mention one of those characters that I was responsible for selecting. And this was a guy who was a postman at the time. He was in the Royal Engineers Postal Courier. He'd only been in it for a very short period of time and had realised very quickly that he'd made a mistake, much in the same way as I made that same mistake in clinical physiology. But before that, had been a sniper in the parachute regiment. And had been a parachutist for, you know, quite some time. He didn't quite fit the academic sort of bits and pieces, but there was just something about him that just said to me, you have got some quality there. And I really cannot overemphasize that. When I would see him, he was selected and he went through the course. When I would see him, on many occasions, I would be the last person to leave the department. I would be leaving at 7:30, 8 o'clock at night, and I'd be locking the doors. This individual was in the tech room working because he would work there and go home and separate his work and his time at home because he had 2 young children. I will mention his name, and it was John Cadwell. John Cadwell now I believe, Major John Cadwell.
Brilliant.
And
Good.
so that just, if you want to epitomise that selection process and the
good idea.
outstanding individual at the other end of it, there you couldn't look for a more gleaming example. There are many, but you know, to me, John is a fantastic example of that.
And that's really nice, and it's good to mention. What, Dougie, what I want to do, I want to acknowledge Tony here. Tony Armstrong, we were talking to his dad, obviously, very, very recently. So he obviously remembers you well from London district. I think Tony went. Did he go on to become a policeman? I'm not quite sure. One of the Armstrong. Right, good. Yeah, I thought that was the case. So anyway, so Tony, listen, thank you, Tony, for engaging.
He's just about to retire.
Now that's okay. In fact, his dad did say the other day that they're about to retire. He's about to retire. I think they might be going off. In fact, I better not say it. They're off on a trip somewhere, but I won't. No, his dad said it, so it's out there. They're off to Dusseldorf for a bit of a schmoolie and a few beers. So so enjoy that. And I did say they got to pop into the Auberge, my brother's bar in Dusseldorf, the Auberge, my younger brother Gary. Go in there and then hopefully be a pint of free beer on the bar. So Dougie, let's move it on.
I'll say very quickly that he and his brother-in-law, Mike Riley, were both in London, who worked for me. And the other sergeant that I had, of course, was Sean London. You know, so the quality was just fantastic.
Oh, you were very lucky there then, because Tony, again, he's retiring in 15 weeks. I think I've only met Tony a few times, but my memories of him are very fond and a very switched on cookie. I'm not surprised that he's gone on to do great stuff, no doubt, in the police as well. And the other two names you mentioned there, Mick Riley, I know extremely well, and we had a tour together with some extremely funny consequences. Again, that was out in Bosnia, and also Sean, you know, a very good and close friend of both of ours. So let's move it on, Dougie. Let's move it on now to what I think might be the final chapter. So you became, unusually for an environmental health cadre person, the Commander Med of London District. What was going on? How the freaking hell did you get that gig? And tell us all about it. And I love the clothes that Commander Meds have to wear. And I want to mention this individual very briefly as well. There's a photograph that I often see crops up in various places on social media, and it's of you and Adrienne Starling and some Sergeant Major from London District. It is the most wonderful photo. I will always speak fondly of Adrienne. I always had I knew she was going to be brilliant from when she first joined the cadre. I just knew, and I watched her go through her training and go on and to do great things. And I know she's done brilliantly. But that photograph is the smiles on it. It's just absolutely heartwarming. So I hope she watches this. Adrienne, you're a star. Everybody in the cadre loves you. Well done, brilliant, and we all think of you all the time. And I don't know who the Sergeant Major is, so I can't speak anything about him. But tell me about Commander Med, Dougie. Yeah, this I can't wait to hear.
I actually I got pink listed whilst I was at Keogh. And I was very lucky. That particular year, I was selected to take over as the SO1 Medical Intelligence at the Surgeon General's Department.
Right.
And I went through all of the sort of classification, all the sort of DV clearance and everything else and that you have to go through. And at the 11th hour, it was decided that it would be better for a clinician to do that job because of some of the nature of some of the work that was being undertaken along with our NATO partners. And so they were looking for a doctor, an occupational medicine doctor to take over. They couldn't find one. So Tiffany, you know, the vet that had done it previously as an SO2, she then took it, and you know, I can't say whether that was a right or wrong move, but you know, it put me back in the tray for selection. So they sent me to 3 UK Div in Bulford and parked me there for what was supposedly going to be 6 months until the following year's board, the number 4 board. I was, you know, I had a great time. You know, there were great people there again. I knew the Commander Med well, and again went on to become General Williams. I was coming home to start my Christmas leave, and I received a phone call, and it was Mike Ryan on the phone. And again, he said, "I understand you're taking over from me." I never knew anything about this whatsoever. And so I then, no, nothing at all. So I then had to go back to Bulford and say to the Commander Med, you know, is this true? And he didn't know anything about it either. And so he rang up records, and sure enough, it was true, but nobody had told nobody. And I had to go to London the next week. Now, remember, I just started my leave for Christmas, but I had to go to London that week because I had to take over the very beginning of January the following year. And the reason for that was because I was honoured, I was blessed, really, with doing the Commander Med's job in the most prestigious period in British history. Because the following year, I was planning and then executing the royal wedding of Kate and William. And the year after that was the 2012 Olympics. And so, you know, I couldn't have done it at a more. Oh, and of course, in between that was the Queen's Diamond Jubilee as well.
Yeah, exactly. So that was a busy time. Wow.
You mentioned a picture. I love that picture. You know, I was, Adrienne is one of the best technicians we've ever had. You know, a fantastic quality individual, an outstanding officer. And I could see the quality in her as the OC when she was one of my instructors. And when I had the opportunity, I had her promoted as an acting warrant officer and put her in as the SMI, albeit for a short period, but I put her in as the SMI because I wanted her to be the first SMI in our cadre. And she was indeed that. Now, I then met her again when I went up to London, and she was the warrant officer in London. And so I also had the ability to be able to prepare her ready for her commissioning interviews. And of course, the rest is history. My loss was her gain because I lost her as my sergeant major, but I gained her as one of my fellow officers. The sergeant major that came in to replace her was Viv Knight, and Viv had some he had some personal circumstances which took him away from London a significant amount of time, so I needed to have some form of stability. And at that time, parked with me in the department, I had the military warrant officer who was the child catcher. So he was the person that went round to all the military hospitals and sick on leave to make sure that those individuals were being properly supported. And so we used to call him the child catcher.
Yeah, I love it.
It was a bit like the truancy officer. It was a bit like the truancy officer of the days of us at school. So Tom is an outstanding soldier, but he's also an outstanding individual. And you can see by the sheer joy and love that comes out of that photograph that we, you know, that we had. So we had a fantastic time, the three of us. I retained, as I had been when I was commissioned. John Swanston held me back to do that year's silly season. You do the three Queen's birthday parades on subsequent Saturdays. So I stayed to do that. So I held back Adrienne so that she could be my adjutant on those parades, and get her the experience of being on a ceremonial parade, probably one of the only times in her life that she'll wear ceremonial uniform on a ceremonial parade in that particular way. And it was fantastic. We had a great summer.
That is fantastic. My mic went on silent then because someone was ringing my doorbell.
Right.
So, but
I'm aware of the time, mate, and so I'll finish up very quickly with the last chapter, the last.
Yeah, let's
bit,
do that. That's important. This is more. It's just as important. Let's go for it.
Yeah. I mean, it is important, and I'll explain. Hopefully, whilst I go along, why I feel it very important. I had expected to stay in London as Commander Med until I retired at the end of my service. I thought that was my last post. Unbeknown to me, when I took up the post, the reorganisation of the Land Command had, or Support Command, had actually sort of got rid of the districts in that way. And so my position, I was the last Commander Med London district. It was actually being moved down to an SO2 who would sit outside of their own department in the G1, G4 area. And so I was then going to have to be moved. By this time, I was a substantive lieutenant colonel. And so I had to be moved somewhere for the last 2 years of my service, 2 and a bit years of my service. You know, I spoke to Phil Harrison at Manningham Records, and he said, look, I'm going to send you, Dougie, I'm going to send you a list of places that are coming up on the next number 4 board. I want you to pick 3 of the best ones that suit you and let you know. So I went home that night, took the list, sat down with Chris. We picked 3 that I thought would be, you know, interesting, but also I would be capable of doing. And they were things like the CO of the recruit offices in London, you know, so all the people that worked in recruiting offices, I would be their CO. So I basically look after their welfare, write their CR, all that sort of thing. Another one, I think, was the commandant of Bisley Ranges or something, you know, so I felt I could walk the dog in the morning up the Bisley Ranges. Sort of, you know, none of that was going to happen. No. Again, that telephone call which happens that suddenly tells you something is, you know, been working beyond, you know, outside of your reach. I had a telephone call from an individual in the in the main building of the Ministry of Defence who said to me, Dougie, I understand you're going to take over from me, and we need to get together soon because I'm being fast-tracked for my next job and I need to leave as soon as I possibly can. Now, this is at the end of the Olympics, so the Olympics is still going on at this stage, and so I've got quite a busy desk, and so, you know, it was a bit of a surprise to me. Anyway, I went to the Ministry of Defence because I never heard of this job, and it was certainly nothing that I put any ticks against. The job was a number 1, what we used to refer to as black bag jobs. This was a number 1 top staff officer's position in the main building of the Ministry of Defence. Right. It was in the largest department, the Chief of Defence Personnel's job area. And to give you an idea of the sort of position or status of the job, the person I was taking over from was being fast-tracked to America to take over a job in the Pentagon. He would then come back and become the youngest brigadier within the RAMC. Wow. And so that's the nature of the sort of individual I was taking over from. The person that took over from me when I retired, his previous job was the commanding officer of the Household Cavalry at Knightsbridge. Right. So you can then get a picture of the job that I'm suddenly sitting. A non-staff trained late entry colonel who actually thinking, I'm in the wrong place here, you know. So anyway, I was put into the job. My immediate boss was a rear admiral in the Navy who had, previous to this, been the Commodore Commandant of Dartmouth. And so you really are working with extremely sharp, career-orientated, I would say top shelf military officers and individuals. And I had to learn bloody fast. But, you know, I didn't, I hadn't had staff training. I hadn't been to, you know, staff college. I hadn't done the senior staff officers college. And so, you know, I really needed to learn very quickly, and especially because one of the roles that I had to take on was the writing of the government's policy for the defence recovery capability. And I spent the next 2 years writing that, and I'm very proud to know that I got it through Royal Assent at the end.
Good.
And so all of the management and of transition of soldiers, sailors and airmen who were either wounded, injured or sick back to service life or out of life into a useful civilian environment was done by that piece of JSP policy. And so, cool. You know, from having no staff training to suddenly having to write a JSP was a bit of a learning curve.
That's fascinating.
But Dick, one of the things I've been privileged to be a friend of the late Chris Richards, and I had Chris Dickinson, and Chris Dickinson and I had gone through training together. He was in the senior squad and I was in the junior squads. We went to Keo together, and we had remained friends all the way through our service life. I'd worked for him as Commander Med in Northern Ireland. And that's another story, because I didn't work as an EHO in Northern Ireland. And so we remained good friends, and I had always lobbied him when he was Colonel AMS at MCMDiv that what we needed was equity. We needed, you know, if somebody goes in front of a board and they fail that board, so be it. But at the moment, none of the EHOs who were senior majors like Ian Armstrong were being put forward for wider employability. So their ability to become a lieutenant colonel was one, and that was, you know, bright all the way through. And so it meant that if you could be the best damn late entry major in the British Army, but you were never going to be given the opportunity as a lieutenant colonel, because you were being boarded. So what they did for me, and later for the likes of Ian Armstrong, Jim Fletcher, and so on, was they gave them the ability to be boarded on the number 4 board and actually be looked at for wider employability, either at E1, which is inside of the Corps, or at E2, which is what I did outside within the military defence.
Cool.
And the thing that I managed to do was I managed to hold my head above water. I wouldn't go any stronger than that, really, because I'm no staff bloody shining individual, but I managed to hold myself up in a very tough, demanding, visible staff job. I used to go to the briefing, the operations briefing, every Monday morning in the deep well of the MOD. And I always thought I'd be chucked out at some stage, but I never was. But, you know,
I love it.
But at the end of the day, it gave the ability for them to say, well, if he can do it, I'm pretty sure these guys who are far better than him can actually come along and be looked at for wider employable jobs. And that my understanding is that is being done now.
That is brilliant. And that probably brings us nicely round to closing statements. So first thing, Dougie, and genuinely mean this, this has been an absolute pleasure. It's gone exactly as I was hoping it would be. It's been full of what can be achieved. You mentioned yourself, you know, right time, a bit of luck. We all need a bit of that every now and then, but it's not down to luck. You've made your own luck in life. You jockeyed yourselves into those positions, done well along the way. And why I particularly enjoyed this chat is because I've known you forever. I mentioned at the start, it's 39 years, or not far, from the day, actually, 39 years when we first met. And I've seen your career. I've been there for parts of it, and I've followed it closely for those bits when I left the army. And I generally mean that I've kept a very close watchful eye. And it just goes to show what can be achieved with the right attitude, the right approach, the right due diligence, getting the right level of qualifications, going that extra mile. People can. And so for me, to go from that young kid coming in, becoming the PTI, going off to Germany, doing this, doing that, then thinking environmental health, and then to go on and do that long and very successful, but more importantly, influential career. And that's the thing I want to sort of close on. So it's the influence and the change that has ensued as a result of your direct influence on the environmental health cadre. It's always been a brilliant cadre, but it's got better, and it's got better because of direct influences of people like you and others of your ilk who make a difference. And you do make a difference, and you have made a difference. And that, I think people need to remember that and be grateful of it. And that will continue in the spirit of the Corps and the cadre. We need good people who are prepared to get stuck in, stick their head above the parapet and make a difference, but not forgetting people along the way. And that came out during your talk on many occasions, and that's really important. You've got to look after the guys and the girls along the way. They're as important as the person. And I'm very glad that you brought that over very, very clearly today. So I think I'm going to give the final word.
The one thing, Dick, the one thing I would say is, it doesn't matter how good you are. It doesn't matter how, how many opportunities you create. Unless you've got all those wonderful people standing next to you,
exactly,
it means nothing.
Yeah, you're not going to make it. It's a great team approach. It really is, and it always will be. And those people who realise that it's not me, it is a bigger, it's an us really. So yeah, Dougie, what a brilliant little chat. I really enjoyed that. I'm going to let you have the final word. Is there anything that we've missed? Anything that needs mentioning? Any final parting gestures before I click the button?
The only thing that I did miss was that I realised when I was the OC that we would have to move in a better way. We were training people, as indeed I had been, for a civilian job. We weren't training people for the military environment health role. And so we needed to take back that control. So we needed to create our own degree, which indeed they have done.
Yeah.
But it was quite clear to me that many of the things that we did within the military could be cross-pollinated into a civilian role. And so it took sitting down with the educators at the university and with who is a very good friend of mine, Graham Dukes, who was the chair, he was the chief executive of the Institute of Environment Health at the time.
Yeah.
It took sitting down with these individuals and really mapping out the initial seeding, if you like, which would then be taken on by successive OCs and training officers to culminate in what we now see as the military environment health degree and the career pathway that they had.
Yeah.
And so when I look at the quality, and Glenn Bullivant is the current OC. Glenn sent me an email the other day, and I just looked at the email trail of all of the individuals on there, and I was almost in tears because I could see names of people that I pushed through the selection who were now captains, majors, and they'd all graduates.
Yeah.
So, if there's one thing I would say, if you've got it in you, environment health will bring it out.
Yeah.
And if there's quality there, it will rise to the top.
It will indeed. Okay, Dougie, on that note, we're going to close the stream. Please don't disappear just yet. But thank you. And I hope people enjoy watching this episode. I've certainly enjoyed being involved in it with you. I appreciate your time. It's been outstanding. Thank you.